student. The problem was I wasn't really fond of classes and formal education. Dad was going to help me launch some sort of business instead. Whatever I wanted to do in life, he'd be right by my side helping me. When I was 18 and had graduated from Richmond Prep, my father asked me, "What are we going to do with you, Karen? What do you want to do with your life?" I said, "A flower shop is a good business." What with all the funerals, weddings, and parties that my friends and their families had to deal with, a florist fit right into the whole scheme of things. So for my graduation present, my father gave me the keys to my very own flower shop. It was right next door to his construction headquarters on Stillwell Avenue in Brooklyn. I guess it was part of his master plan for me that I run my own business. My parents assumed I would run the flower shop, meet a nice guy, get married, and have a family. They wanted nothing but the best for me. Even if it seemed like Dad was trying to mold my life by being so involved, I knew he only wanted me to be on a different path than he was, away from the ups and downs that went with the lifestyle he had chosen. He never wanted to worry about Gerard and me to get to the phone call that one of us was in jail. He thrust me into my post high school life with my best foot forward. His idea of a little flower shop couldn't have been a better plan. In many ways, the last thing I wanted was the responsibility of running my own business. But if I was going to be in charge, at the very least, I wanted to pick the name of the place. After thinking about it long and hard, I decided to call it Exotic Touch, a name both elegant and tropical. I was very proud of my shop, and it was important to my father. The name Exotic Touch reflected that perfectly. My father's big thing with Gerard and me was that we should always be responsible, and I'm certain he put the shop next to the headquarters so he could make sure I was taking care of business. He didn't get me the shop just so I'd have something to do. He wanted me to run it, to take it seriously, to be on time. He told me, "Never forget, this place is yours. You're the only one who's going to put the key in the door at 8 a.m. You should be proud of it." I was proud of the place, but I was also a kid. The truth was, I didn't know anything about flowers, boutonnieres, bridal bouquets, or centerpiece arrangements. Still, everybody in the entire neighborhood bought their flowers from me, including John Gotti himself, and my business was booming. Catering halls, funeral parlors, and small businesses all placed their orders with me. It seemed like I could charge whatever I wanted. That price was no object. Many of the big bouquets and arrangements were selling for $500 a pop. I worked grueling hours in the flower shop, opening at 8 a.m. and often staying until 9 or 10 at night to fill all the orders. Gangsters, they sent flowers for everything. We got all the work for the Scarpese Funeral Home on 86th Street, and were the house florists for two local catering halls. Everybody wanted to use us. We were overwhelmed with orders and could barely handle all the work. I was utterly exhausted. Then one day it suddenly hit me. The reason I was getting so much business was because I was Sammy the Bull's daughter. People respected my father so much they would not take their business anywhere else. Dad was a feared man, but he was also liked and respected. He also treated the people around him well, helping them to make money. If anyone close to him opened a new business, he would be the first to support him, and he expected everyone he knew to do the same. So when it came time for me to open up the shop, everyone he had once helped returned the favor. We were pretty much the florists for the entire Gambino crime family. That was good enough for me. I liked that my store was popular. In light of my steady stream of customers, Dad brought in a partner for me, a friend of a friend of a friend named Mario. Poor Mario. He was completely stressed out most of the time, knowing he was creating flower arrangements for the likes of John Gotti and Sammy the Bull. The reality was they probably would never have known if the flower arrangements weren't perfect, and I am sure they would not have put up a big beef if they weren't 100% satisfied. But Mario was always striving to make sure that all of our arrangements were flawless, just in case. He put a lot of pressure on himself. John would call us all the time to send out flower arrangements, and every time he did, Mario would put himself in a frenzy trying to make them perfect. Plus, he had to deal with me, a 19-year-old, not a care in the world Italian girl who was only casually interested in being a businesswoman, although I was doing my best not to shirk my responsibilities. After the shop closed, I'd go into the city to party with my friends at the nightclubs. I'd get home at 4 a.m. and be at the shop at 8 with a horrible hangover. Mario would be so paranoid. There would be a funeral or something equally important, and there I was staggering around, nauseous from the sweetness of the flowers. Even though I was a kid and a little on the wild side, I knew how important it was to my father that I be responsible, so I'd work despite the hangovers. I was a lot like my dad. When I did something, I gave it my all. At the flower shop, I strove to make him proud. The funeral pieces were a nightmare for me. I had to cut all the flowers on an angle so they'd be the right height for the arrangement. Something that was always huge and elaborate. We'd haul the monster floral pieces to Scarpace's or the church or both, then race back several hours later to collect them, bring them back to the exotic touch, pull out stems we could use again, and recycle them into something bridal. Mario was taking on most of the stress of the place. I'd be saying, "Don't worry," and he'd be hustling around like a man with a gun at his head. My father never put us under pressure, but I guess he felt it on his own. He acted as though every order we filled had to be flawless, and if something went wrong, it would all fall on him, even though that was not the case. My father was harder on me. I think he realized the importance of grooming me early so I could be successful. Although I was never good with school, I had definitely demonstrated that I was good with business. I had a certain hustle, a lot like him. I felt that one of my father's main reasons for opening the flower shop was to teach me responsibility and how to run a business. The fact that it was a good money maker was an added bonus. Still, I think I drove Mario nuts. I had heard that I wouldn't need to charge sales tax for people who chose to pay in cash. The next day, a customer called the shop with a fairly big order and asked if she could pay with a credit card. I responded, "Sure, but if you pay in cash instead of credit, we won't charge you tax." Right then, Uncle Eddie wandered into the shop. Being next door at the construction office, he came by once in a while to check in on me for Dad. When he heard what I said, he pulled the phone out of my hand, slammed it down, and yelled, "What are you doing? There might be a wiretap. You can't say things like that on the phone." Dad showed up later that afternoon. Uncle Eddie had clearly filled him in, because the first thing he said to me before he even said hello was, "Karen, people have to pay taxes. People want to pay taxes. You can't tell them something like, 'Don't pay your taxes' on the phone." I knew that people didn't really want to pay taxes, but I understood my father's hint. Don't say that on the phone. I had owned the shop for less than 1 year when I started noticing surveillance vehicles watching our building. I had noticed them on a side street near our house as well. I used to see them from time to time when I was still sneaking out of the house. They even knew me by name. One time I was tiptoeing through the side gate, and one of the agents rolled down his window and said with a smile, "Going out again, Karen?" Now surveillance had picked up dramatically. It seemed like they were watching Dad 24 hours a day. I understood that John Gotti and my father were running a criminal enterprise, but it was hard for me to envision the illegal part of the business. My father took his work with the construction company very seriously. He followed a very strict regimen. First, he'd start with his workout at the gym in Brooklyn, not too far from the office. Then he'd head for Stillwell Avenue, arriving before noon. He'd stay there until 4:30 or 5, making sure he'd be home for dinner at 5:30. He loved construction and took great pride in it. Although he had got most of his contracts because of who he was and his reputation as a feared gangster, he still treated each job with integrity. With my flower shop right next door to Dad's headquarters, I'd see him sitting behind his desk talking about construction and cement to customers. People would show up at his office, and after they shook hands, they'd do the rest of their business walking along the sidewalk outside my shop. I thought it was a little odd, but I realized later that the only way he could keep his conversation from being recorded was to have them away from the office. Dad would always wave to me when they passed. I knew they were talking about illegal stuff, and they were being extremely cautious about not being recorded. Although I knew there were illegal activities going on behind the scene, looking at it from my perspective, it was hard to envision the criminal side of it because everything appeared on the up and up. In the mornings, I would see all the crews climbing onto the Marathon Concrete Corp trucks and going out. They were dressed in their Marathon construction uniforms, black shirts with red lettering that Dad had made for all his workers. Friends of the family had them too. Even Gerard and I had our very own Marathon construction bomber jackets. Dad's secretary, Sherry, was always at the reception desk answering the phones, paying the bills, and doing the books. I guess I just really didn't see the criminal side of it. Even though I knew it was there, it didn't matter to me because all I saw was a man who took pride in what he did. As much as he took pride in being a gangster, that was the side of him he kept hidden as much as possible from his family. The way he ran his business was so organized. I guess that's why they call it organized crime. Dad was so successful in the construction business that he controlled most of the unions in the 5 boroughs. I think even the people who weren't in the mob didn't mind working with him. A big part of his success was he made sure he made sure the jobs got done. John Gotti was Dad's boss, and my father always made sure that John got a large kickback from all the construction jobs he was doing. That's how it worked in the mob. But Dad was pretty much the go-to guy in construction for the Gambino family. Not only did he have Marathon, but he also had his hand in drywall, sheetrock, and plumbing companies, to name a few. If Donald Trump wants to build a building, he can't do it without us, Dad told me. We control the unions, so we just call and tell them to stop the trucks. It was October of 1990 when my father sat the family down and told us he was going on the lam. We had just gotten home from the reception from my cousin Gina's communion. When he summoned my brother and me to his bedroom, I already knew something big was going to happen. The FBI had been staked out in front of the flower shop for weeks. They even had agents in unmarked cars posted outside the reception hall that night. Over the years, I had always been aware of the feds and their surveillance vehicles, but within the last couple of weeks, they were everywhere my father went. By now, I was 100% aware that Dad was the underboss of the Gambino family, and for the first time I felt his world closing in on all of us. It was at this point that I realized that no matter how much he tried to keep us away from it, this was my world as well. Yet I still knew so little about it. Dad said he was going into hiding from the feds, but he didn't explain why. It was only later that I learned he was running on the advice of John Gotti. Gotti had learned there was an indictment coming down against him, my father, and Frank Locascio. The three men were going to be arrested and charged with 5 counts of murder. Paul Castellano, Thomas Bellotti, Paul's underboss, who had been executed with Paul outside of the Spark Steakhouse, Robert D.B. DiBernardo, a capo regime in the Gambino family who had been shot twice in the head in 1986, Liborio Milito, a Gambino soldier who had disappeared in 1988 and whose body had never been found, and Louis De Bono, another Gambino soldier who was shot and killed in the parking lot of the World Trade Center in 1990 because he didn't obey an order to go and see John Gotti. In addition to the murder charges, Gotti was also facing an indictment on racketeering. Bugs had been planted by the FBI in a room above the Raven Night Social Club on Mulberry Street, and conversations between John and Frankie DeChico had been recorded linking my father, John, and Frankie to the murders. Gotti felt they could stall their arrest if my father went away. Mom was already in the bedroom when Gerard and I came in. He didn't tell us why he was running. I guess he figured the less we knew, the better it would be. You may read some things in the newspaper, but I just need you to trust me. I'll be okay. We didn't ask any questions and went upstairs to bed. A couple of hours later, Dad came into my bedroom to give me a kiss. I want you to know I love you, he whispered. If you need anything, Uncle Eddie and Big Louie and them will be here to take care of you. Big Louie was Dad's friend, Louis Valerio. I asked my father when he was coming back. He stopped, stared at me for a bit, and said, I don't know. When I was a kid, my father would say, make a fist. Then he would make us punch his hand. He would say, see, when you make a fist and hold your hand tight, it will make you strong. This is like our family. If we always stick and stay tight like a fist, we will always be strong and nothing can come between us. No matter what, whether I was playing sports or receiving an award, sick or hurt, it was his way of letting me know he supported me and to stay strong. He had my back. We were one. This signal between us was his way of saying to me everything would be okay without saying it. I couldn't sleep that night, wondering where he was going. When I got up in the morning, he was gone. For a month, I didn't see him or talk to him. He didn't call. My mother didn't talk about it, but I could tell she felt empty. I'd come home every day and look in his room to see if he was there. He wasn't, and I felt empty like my mother. I wondered if it was going to be like that for the rest of my life. Not knowing what was going on was worse than anything. Then speculation came out in the newspapers that Sammy the Bull could be dead. I went straight to my mother. Mom, is it true? I asked her. Is Daddy dead? No, he's okay, she assured me. Did you talk to him? Yes, my mother answered. She hadn't really spoken to him, but someone had gotten a message through. Is he ever going to come home? I don't know, she replied. I don't understand, I said. Is this it? Is this how it's going to end? I don't know how to make you understand because I don't fully understand, Mom said. In reality, she did understand. She had spent her whole life trying to shield us from Dad's world. She always knew she couldn't keep the reality of Cosa Nostra a secret from us forever. We always had money, food on the table, nice vacations, and a summer house. Dad always made sure Mom drove a nice car. We didn't want for anything, but Mom always realized that one day we would have to face the consequences of the day Dad earned his money. Now the time was finally here. She accepted that, but she didn't know how to convey it to her children. I had never thought about the death part of it. It was more that when there was a death, everything happening around us seemed bigger than the death itself. I have been dealing with death my whole life, from my Uncle Nicky and Stymie on. From the time I was a little kid, my father was going to funerals. There was a thin veneer disguising all the things my father did. Dad was like Superman. At home, he was a mild-mannered father, funny, charming, warm, the soft disciplinarian. When we went out, he had his Superman suit. He was elegant. He stood up straighter, and he had an air of authority. I thought he commanded a gentleman's respect, but I found out people were truly afraid of him. He was scary and powerful. He controlled something, although I wasn't sure exactly what. I never saw the other side of Sammy the Bull, the violent, cold executioner side. Mom had heard of a few men who had gone on the lam before. If they came home at all, they usually went to prison when they got back. There had also been cases of men who never left, changed their identity, and never returned. Others had turned up dead. Because of the risk to the family, when a man went on the lam, he would cut off all ties to his prior life for everybody's safety. My mother was a true mob wife. She never asked questions, and she did not want. My mother was a true mob wife. She never asked questions, and she did what she was told. I think she felt that if she ignored things, they would just go away. This time, I think she realized it was not going away, but she was still unsure how to deal with it. Her motherly instinct kicked in, and she needed to figure out how to protect Gerard and me from what was about to happen. The morning after the story about Dad possibly being dead appeared in the paper, I awoke to my mother calling to me from downstairs. "Karen, come down here." I went down to the kitchen, and Dad was standing there with a full beard and wearing a green shirt. I just started crying. "I thought I was never going to see you again," I said. "I couldn't stay away, even if coming back means I will have to spend the rest of my life in prison." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Prison?" He didn't directly answer the question. We all sat down for breakfast. Then Dad went into his bedroom to shave. I never knew where he had been. I wanted to know, but I realized it wasn't the time to get into it. For the first time in my life, I felt like it wasn't my business to ask. At that point, my prison question didn't matter anymore. I was just so happy to have him home, even though my happiness was short-lived. I later found out that John had thought if my father left town, the feds couldn't bring the indictments against any of them. The plan was for him to make his way to Brazil and run the family from there. He had been in and around Atlantic City. He was getting passports made up, so he sized up other cities in South America that might make a good base of operation. My father had been under the eye of the FBI ever since Paul's death and our move to Lambert's Lane. The whole surveillance thing felt like a game. Dad and his crew would joke about the feds from the flower shop. I'd hear Big Louie's big voice saying, "Guys, should we send them some pizza?" My father wasn't home for long, less than 24 hours, when he was summoned by John Gotti to make an appearance at the Ravenite Social Club. Dad was irritated that John wanted to meet at such an obvious place. He would have preferred to meet in a secret location, considering he had a tip from a cop that he and Gotti were going to be arrested, which was why he had gone on the lam in the first place. The feds had been looking for him day and night for the last month. The surveillance had become so heavy that agents had actually been following Mom and me, thinking we might be meeting him secretly. Although Dad knew that he was coming home to be arrested, he had wanted an extra few days to tie up some loose ends and spend time with his family. Because Dad was so loyal to John, he agreed to meet him on his terms. When my father left the house that day, he was dressed in jeans, a white t-shirt, a black leather jacket, and socks and sneakers. Normally, when he went to meet John Gotti, he would wear a suit, but he was pretty sure he was going to be arrested that night and had dressed for the occasion. When he walked out the door that evening, I knew in my heart he wasn't going to come home. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I looked over at Mom and wondered if she felt the same way I did. It was hard to tell, because she was being strong. It was like we were all going through the motions. It was part of the lifestyle, and it came with the territory. Gerard was upstairs when Dad left. I didn't bother to go in and check on him, but I was sure he was feeling the same way. He was younger than me, and it was almost like we looked at Dad's life through two different sets of eyes. He was a lot like Mom. If he ignored it, maybe it didn't happen. He also may not have been as intrigued by my father's lifestyle as I was. Dad and I were very close. By nature, I was extremely curious, and I liked to know what was going on, especially when it came to my father. I knew that night was different. Everybody assumed Dad was going to be arrested, but nobody was saying it, at least not to me. Sometimes when Dad would make jokes, I knew he was making light of a situation. However, he took his role at being a gangster very seriously, with all its pros and cons. Dad and some of the old-time gangsters didn't like how John handled his business so publicly and predictably. Here they were with all this heat coming down, and my father would have to go to the same place at the same time every night, Mulberry Street, at 6 o'clock to meet his boss. My father also felt that John was giving the feds the entire Gambino family on a silver platter. The mob was supposed to be a secret society, and by holding their meetings so out in the open, the element was gone. The old-timers would tell my father to talk to John to take it down a notch. But John's motto was, let's put it in their face. Let's show them who we are. I guess in his mind, he felt like he was untouchable, but his arrogance made surveillance easy. So the feds watched and built their case. When Dad got to the Ravenite Social Club that night, John was already there. The club was filled with the Gambino captains and lieutenants who had to report there on a nightly basis to turn in money and discuss the daily operations. My father joined John and Frankie at John's table in the back. They were there only 15 minutes when the feds knocked on the steel door with a speakeasy peephole. Dad later told me that John was very calm when the agents came inside. We have been expecting you, he said. We are just going to have our last cup of coffee before we go anywhere. John, my father, and Frankie remained at the back table, sipping on espresso, while the agent asked each man in the club to produce his ID and state his name. The men were excused one by one, until only Dad, John, and Frankie were left. The men finished their coffee, heard their Miranda rights, and waited to be handcuffed before they were taken to unmarked cars waiting on Mulberry Street. The three men were driven to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in separate vehicles. Somehow the press knew about it, so throngs of reporters were waiting for them to get out of their cars in front of the jail on Center Street. John was dressed up in his dark pinstripe suit, red, gold, and black necktie, and yellow silk scarf, always polished and ready for the cameras. Dad, meanwhile, answered a reporter who was pointing at him and asking, "Is he one of the guys?" "No, I got these two guys under arrest," he joked, motioning to the feds on either side of him. "Everything's under control." Once inside the MCC, the men were ordered to surrender their street clothes, everything but their socks. Back at the Ravenite before the arrest, John had commented about how Dad had not dressed for the occasion, meaning the arrest, which would turn into a photo op for John. But now that the men were in jail and stripped of everything but their socks, John didn't seem to mind so much that my dad was wearing thick sweat socks. They were good inside the cold jail. John asked my father if he could borrow them. Dad, ever loyal, took them off and handed them over. I knew Dad was a gangster, but I thought the news and newspapers were exaggerating what a mobster was. But with my father's arrest, I soon learned that I may have been underplaying what it meant to be a gangster. After Dad was arrested, I thought he would be released on bail and be back home with us. We certainly had enough cash to post bail. But that wasn't the way it worked out. John, Frankie, and my father were considered dangerous and a threat to society and were held without any bail. Next will be Chapter 10.